Decisions are complicated as there are many different factors that may affect them. Within the moral decision making process, the four most important aspects are the nature of love, conscience, sin, and your background morals.
Every person has their own definition of a moral decision. Each person has to create a baseline of their morality. This is a foundation of their personal experiences, faith, knowledge, and many other items. Simply, it is what a person holds to be right and wrong at their core.
An example of a foundation like this is Catholicism. Catholicism is what many hold as their background morals as it defines their actions on a basic level. All their decisions are generally rooted in this faith, is what they base their definitions of right and wrong on.
It is in this baseline, these core beliefs, that the conscience is rooted. The conscience is a commitment to a belief or set of morals. It is from this commitment that one judges their actions in a given context. It is where one reflects prior to making a decision if their decision will violate their moral commitment. This is called prospective conscience. There is also retrospective conscience, where one looks back at their actions. In general, the conscience is what enables one to judge their actions with regards to their moral background.
Another necessary component of a moral decision is love. One cannot make a moral decision involving others without some kind of love. In his book, The Art of Loving, Erich Fromm indicates that to properly love, we must be without narcissism. This is important in decision making because we will never make moral decisions if we only think about ourselves. We must also consider others in the context of the decision.
The temptation of sin often acts as a barrier in the formation of moral decisions. Sin is a barrier blocking your conscience, faith, and love. Despite having a well formed conscience and an understanding of love, sin can steer one away from making a good moral decision.
We can see two versions of the moral decision making process within the end of the affair, one where a moral decision is made, and another where a moral decision fails to be made. In the book, Sarah acts as someone who made a good moral decision with regards to whether she should leave Henry or stay with him.
Although not aware of it in the beginning, she was raised a Catholic, and through her baptism, her moral basis was rooted in Catholicism. This was strengthened later in the story through her future conversion to the faith. The Catechism of the Catholic Church holds divorce does injure to the covenant of salvation, of which sacramental marriage is a sign. From her moral background, the act of leaving Henry is wrong because it is a destruction of their marriage for a reason that is not holistically just. The Catholic Church also holds that adultery is wrong, and Sarah is called to a conversion from her sinful ways of adultery after witnessing Henry almost die.
Her prospective conscience, defined by the values of Catholicism, helps her to figure out this, as throughout the story, it tells her that it is wrong to leave Henry before she actually commits the action. We see this throughout her journals where she repeatedly questions the idea, but in the end concludes that she will not leave him. Despite this desire to leave him, her conscience pulls her back and helps her to judge this decision as something that would harm her.
Finally, she also exemplifies real love. Although she loves both Henry and Bendrix, and prefers Bendrix over Henry, she chooses Henry. Her conscience helps her examine the influence that her decision would have on those involved, and chooses not to be narcissistic. She could have just gone with Bendrix, whom she liked better. However, she considered Henry too, and realized that the decision involved him. She also decided to have patience in her relationship with Henry, which kept them together.
Now, there were many moments where Sarah was tempted to sin. As discussed in the Screwtape Letters, sexual temptation has the potential to harm many relationships. At their low points, it can cause people to abandon their morality, and Sarah was strongly tempted in this way. She realizes that it is the sexual interaction she is having with Bendrix that is contributing to her moral desire to be with him and go against the vows she made to God in her marriage. It prevents her from being holistically committed to Henry, as sex is meant to be a unifying action between married couples. There can't be unity between two people if a third one is involved. While Sarah was in a spiritual low point, struggling to make a decision between Henry and Bendrix, while also being gravely ill, Bendrix makes a point to show how he would use this to an advantage in tearing her away from the vow so that she would be with him. It is quoted, "She loves us both, I thought, but if there is a conflict between God and a man, I know who will win. I could put my hand on her thigh or my mouth on her breast. He was imprisoned behind the altar and couldn't move to plead his cause."
Sarah manages to avoid this temptation and in the end makes the moral decision to end her affair with Bendrix. Bendrix in the story could not follow the moral decision-making process to realize that Sarah was right to leave him for a variety of reasons. The first was his inability to love.
Bendrix followed the idea of impaired self-love defined by Fromm because he was quite self-centered when dealing with any situation regarding Sarah. He did not holistically love himself, which caused him to be unable to fully love Sarah, regardless of whether their relationship was moral. Without loving himself, he felt quite secure within the relationship. This insecurity gradually tore the relationship apart. We see this as Bendrix repeatedly mentions how he questioned whether Sarah could love him. "I hated her because I wished to think she didn't love me."
He also possessed a certain narcissism that prevented him from realizing that the affair he was having was wrong. During the affair, Bendrix could not think of the situation from the point of view of Sarah and Henry, only himself. He wanted Sarah for himself regardless of the situation she was in with Henry or her own personal beliefs. As he puts it, "I refuse to believe that love could take any other form than mine. I measured love by the extent of my jealousy, and by that standard, of course, she could not love me at all." He puts himself ahead of other people because he only wants to know what benefits him regardless if it is wrong.
Bendrix feared losing Sarah, and because of this, all of her actions became amplified in a negative way in his perception. In the Screwtape Letters, Wormwood made the patient think of his fears to give them anxiety so they'd overthink everything. Bendrix could not bear the loss of Sarah, but when he did, he was very selfish of how everything was handled.
Bendrix wanted Sarah all for himself, and it was evident when she passed away as he became jealous that God has converted her. Bendrix wanted to coordinate the funeral and keep her ashes for himself. This is the exact opposite of kind of love that God calls us to. As noted in the Bible, love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud, it does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Bendrix is essentially the exact opposite of this definition of love, as when he is with Sarah. He is easily angered and extremely envious of Henry. This causes him to be completely unhappy in his relationship with her, not understand the proper decision to end his affair because he is clouded with envy.
Bendrix is also completely blocked from making the moral decision by sin. Bendrix functions throughout the story in a state of sin through omission. He fails to consider the fact that Sarah believes in God and accept that his actions with her were wrong. His failure to notice this causes him to continually sin. Even after her death, he cannot accept that she was Catholic and continues to live in a vice against God, which ultimately destroys his relationship with God completely.